She called him out on live television in front of donors, diplomats, and a national audience. Queen Camilla dared a Coldstream Guard to answer one impossible question, expecting him to freeze. But 31 seconds later, she wasn't smiling anymore, and the only sound left in the room was silence. Now, before we show you the exact moment, her command turned into regret. And the guard delivered a response so sharp, it broke the crown's composure. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Tap subscribe with the bell turned on and stay right here, because tonight, one guard didn't just answer a riddle. He revealed the real intelligence wasn't sitting on the throne. The green drawing room looked like something out of a period drama that night. Amber chandeliers throwing gold across tapestries that had seen centuries of decisions, mistakes, and monarchs who thought they'd last forever. At the far end, a semicircle of cameras stood like judges, silent, recording, feeding everything live to the nation. This was Mind and Monarchy, Prince William's charity quiz for youth literacy, the kind of soft-edged royal event that was supposed to feel inspiring and slightly boring. Light questions, polite applause, a few scholars in tweed making careful jokes. The entire event had been William's idea, a way to rebrand the monarchy as intellectually engaged, accessible, modern. He'd personally signed off on every detail, from the guest list to the question difficulty. What he hadn't signed off on was improvisation. But Camilla had a habit of testing boundaries, small ones mostly. A comment here, a redirect there. Nothing explosive, just enough to remind people she had authority too. 6 months earlier, at a veterans gala, she'd made a similar move, calling out a decorated officer for standing too rigidly during the national anthem. The moment had been edited out of the broadcast, but the officer had been quietly reassigned 2 weeks later. No formal complaint, no investigation. Just gone. The palace had learned not to push back, and Camilla had learned she could get away with it. Tonight's event had been running smoothly for 40 minutes. The questions had been gentle, the answers rehearsed. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then Camilla decided to go off script. She sat centre stage in a cream jacket that caught every spotlight, legs crossed, fingers drumming lightly on the armrest beside the moderator. A mild, balding broadcaster who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Around them, rows of velvet chairs held donors, press reps, educational reformists. Everyone behaving, everyone on brand. But Camilla's eyes kept drifting toward the back of the room. Standing at perfect ceremonial ease by the oak double doors was Sergeant Rhys Mallory, Coldstream Guard, red tunic pressed like glass. Bearskin hat, sitting heavy and formal on his head. He hadn't moved since the broadcast started, hadn't blinked, hadn't even shifted his weight. He was decoration. At least, that's what she thought. What Camilla didn't know, what wasn't written in any duty roster or ceremonial briefing, was that Rhys Mallory had been in this room before. Not as a guard, as a child. His grandfather had served under Queen Elizabeth decades ago, back when the Coldstream still rotated through Windsor on monthly ceremonial cycles. Rhys had been 7 years old when his grandfather brought him here during a rare family day, stood him in this very room and told him, "This is what service looks like, not the uniform. The choice to stay still when everything in you wants to move." That memory had carried him through Helmand, through 2 tours where staying still meant staying alive, through Sandhurst, where they taught you that discipline wasn't about obedience, it was about control, and through 30 years of service, where he'd learned that the hardest orders weren't the ones that asked you to move. They were the ones that asked you to stay silent when you had something to say. Tonight, he'd been assigned this post as a courtesy, a senior officer nearing the end of his service, given a quiet ceremonial duty at a low-stakes charity event. No threats, no variables, just stand, observe, and leave. He'd expected to be invisible. He hadn't expected to be called out. Camilla tilted her head slightly and smiled, the kind of smile that looked warm on camera but had teeth underneath. "All these brilliant minds at work," she said, voice lifting just loud enough to pull focus. "And yet the one standing perfectly still might just outthink us all." Polite laughter rippled through the audience. Nervous. Unsure if this was rehearsed. The moderator blinked twice, confused. One of the aides in the third row shifted uncomfortably. Camilla didn't stop. "Shall we find out?" The room got quieter. Not silent, just tighter, like everyone had inhaled at once and forgotten to let it out. Rhys didn't react. His gaze stayed locked somewhere past her left shoulder. Professional, distant, unmoved, but Camilla was already committed. "Sergeant," she said, louder now, her tone sharpening into something closer to command. "You've been silent all evening. Let's see what discipline looks like under pressure." The murmur that followed wasn't polite anymore. It was uncertain. A few cameras swiveled toward Rhys. The moderator glanced down at his cue cards like they might save him. They wouldn't. "Perhaps we should move to the next segment," the moderator tried. Camilla raised one hand, not aggressive, just firm. "That's an order, guardsman." The room went dead. No shuffling, no coughing. Even the technicians at the back of the hall froze mid-adjustment, headsets half raised. Rhys's jaw stayed locked. Not a flinch, not a breath you could see, but something shifted. He lifted his gaze just enough to meet hers across the room. One look. No words, no anger, no amusement. Just clarity. And in that moment, everyone present, even the moderator clutching his cards like a life raft, understood something had just changed. This wasn't banter anymore. This was institutional. This was live. And this was about to get very, very real. Windsor Castle had hosted kings, queens, treaties, and wars. It had survived fire, scandal, and tabloids. But tonight, in the green drawing room, it was hosting something less scripted and far more dangerous. A royal who'd overstepped, and a soldier who couldn't ignore it. The broadcast was live. Streaming across the UK, under Prince William's Royal Literacy Fund banner, meant to spotlight education, critical thinking, classroom reform. It had been carefully curated, pre-approved questions. Vetted guests, safe, inspiring, boring, until 5 minutes ago. And the problem wasn't just that Camilla had gone off script. The problem was that she'd issued a direct order to a uniformed guard, on camera, in front of witnesses, under royal lighting, and framed it as entertainment. Across the hall, Sergeant Rhys Mallory stood exactly as he had for the past hour. Spine aligned, hands clasped behind his back. Chin level beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. The ceremonial stillness of the Coldstream Guard was designed to look immovable, untouchable. But those who'd served knew better. Behind that stillness was calculation. A royal order wasn't something you could ignore, not without breaching your station, not without consequences. But answering it, especially like this, meant stepping into a trap designed to make you look foolish in front of the entire country. And Rhys knew exactly what she was trying to do. The moderator leaned toward Camilla, voice barely a whisper. "Ma'am, protocol forbids engaging on-duty personnel in unscheduled public discourse." Camilla's reply was a breath and a shrug. A single question won't bring down the empire. But the tension in the room said otherwise. Scholars in the front row exchanged glances. Senior palace staff at the back shifted their weight, hands folding and unfolding. This wasn't protocol. This was power being used carelessly, and everyone could feel it. Inside Rhys's head, instinct screamed restraint, but duty screamed louder. She had issued a formal directive, in uniform, on broadcast. He couldn't ignore it without violating his post, and yet to answer would be to validate mockery dressed in ceremony. His breathing slowed. 2 breaths. 3. Rhys Mallory wasn't just a guard. 2 tours in Helmand. Sandhurst trained. Decorated for gallantry. A mind built for strategy, logistics and pressure. But none of that was visible on his sleeve. Camilla didn't know who she was talking to. She thought she was baiting a statue. What she'd actually done was wake something sharper. The moderator glanced at his cue cards again, desperate for an exit. The audience leaned forward just slightly. The cameras stayed locked. And Rhys? He'd already made his decision. He would answer. Once. Precisely. And with the full weight of the institution he had sworn to serve. The moderator's hands trembled slightly as he scanned the cue cards. These events ran on rails, no surprises, no risks, no deviation. But Camilla was staring at him with that look that meant obey or be replaced. And he knew better than to argue with royalty on live television. He pulled a card from the unopened stack, one labelled Advanced Logic Guest Round, and cleared his throat. If 10 coded safes open sequentially, each taking twice as long as the last, and the first takes 1 second, how long before the 10th safe opens? A few scholars smiled. One whispered something to the person beside them. It wasn't a trick question. It was exponential math, the kind that made most people freeze. Camilla turned toward Rhys, her grin widening. Come now, Sergeant. Even a guard should know how to count. The air in the room thickened like someone had closed a window. Rhys didn't flinch, didn't shift. His eyes stayed forward, calculating in that silence that seemed to stretch time itself. Then he said, flat and certain, 512 seconds. The moderator's eyebrows shot up. He checked the answer key, lips parting slightly. That's correct. A ripple of murmurs spread across the front rows. One reporter laughed, short, disbelieving, before catching himself and going silent. But it wasn't just the press. In the third row, a professor from Cambridge leaned toward his colleague and whispered something that the boom mic barely caught. Exponential sequencing. Most of my students can't do that without a calculator. One of Camilla's senior aides, a woman in her 50s who'd been with the household for 2 decades, shifted in her seat. She'd seen this before, not the quiz, but the look on Camilla's face, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers curled just a fraction tighter around the armrest. It was the look of someone who'd expected an easy win and just realized the game had changed. The moderator glanced toward the production booth, hoping for a signal to move on. He didn't get one. The cameras were still live. The audience was still watching. And Camilla, who'd built a career on never showing weakness in public, was now faced with a choice. Back down gracefully or double down. She chose the latter. Camilla's smile stiffened. A lucky guess, she said, light but brittle. Let's try something less arithmetic. The moderator's eyes darted toward the production booth again, silently begging for rescue. He didn't get it. Camilla wasn't stopping. She leaned forward, voice sharpening now, not playful anymore, but pointed. Let's see how far your luck goes, Sergeant. She looked around the room, drawing strength from the attention, from the cameras, from the fact that she was still in control, or thought she was. A commander tells his troops, every soldier who lies will be shot, and every soldier who tells the truth will be hanged. One man steps forward and says, I will be shot. She paused, savouring the moment. What happens to him? The question hung in the air like smoke. A scholar in the front row blinked. He recognised it, a paradox puzzle, Oxford-level logic, the kind that tested not memory but understanding. Camilla turned back to Rhys. Let's see if your discipline comes with wit. The room went completely still. The broadcast timer in the corner of the screen started ticking. 31 seconds on the clock. Someone in the back whispered, "It's live," before being shushed. Rhys didn't move, but inside his head, the question was already breaking apart. A commander tells troops that liars will be shot and truth-tellers will be hanged. One man says, "I will be shot." What happens? It wasn't a riddle. It was a command structure failure. The kind of paradox that, in real military operations, got people killed not because of enemy action, but because of contradictory orders from command. He'd seen it in Afghanistan. A lieutenant ordering suppressing fire while a captain ordered ceasefire. Two direct commands, both lawful, both impossible to obey simultaneously. The answer wasn't about cleverness. It was about recognizing when authority had undermined itself. At 5 seconds, he exhaled quietly. At 10, Camilla tilted her head, amusement turning smug. She glanced toward the moderator as if to say, "See?" At 15, one of the scholars in the front row, a woman in her 60s who taught philosophy at Oxford, leaned forward slightly. She recognized what was happening. Not a guard freezing under pressure, a mind working through formal logic in real time. At 20, Camilla muttered under her breath, "He's frozen already. I rest my case." But the aide beside her, the same woman who'd tensed earlier, wasn't so sure. She'd served long enough to recognize the difference between panic and processing, and what she was seeing in Sergeant Mallory's face wasn't confusion, it was clarity forming. At 25 seconds, his right hand twitched once, barely perceptible, but enough for the camera to catch it. A tell. Not nervousness, completion. The question had been answered. Now it was just a matter of delivering it. Then came the calm, even reply. "He lives, ma'am." Camilla blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The command contradicts itself," Rhys said, his voice steady as stone. "No lawful outcome can be carried out. To shoot him makes his statement true. To hang him makes it false. Either way, no just officer can obey." The moderator froze mid-note. An audible murmur spread across the room, low, stunned, rippling outward like water. The scholars exchanged glances. One nodded slowly, almost in admiration. The Oxford philosopher, who'd been watching so intently, sat back in her chair, with something that looked like respect. But it was the reaction from the palace staff that mattered most. In the fourth row, a young press officer who'd been typing notes on her tablet stopped mid-sentence. She'd been briefed extensively on how to handle tonight's event, what to highlight, what to downplay, what to spin if anything went sideways, but there was nothing in her briefing about this. About a guard systematically dismantling a royal's premise on live television using nothing but formal logic. Beside her, one of the senior household staff, a man who'd served 3 monarchs and thought he'd seen everything, sat with his hands folded in his lap, staring at Rhys with an expression that wasn't quite shock. It was recognition. The kind you have when you realize someone has just done something that will be talked about in these halls for decades. Near the back, partially hidden behind a stone column, 2 off-duty guards stood in civilian clothes. They'd come to support their sergeant, expecting a quiet night of watching him stand still while royals talked about literacy initiatives. One of them, a younger corporal who'd served under Rhys in training, had his phone out, recording. Not the official broadcast feed, just the room, the faces, the moment. He'd stop recording 30 seconds later and immediately send the file to 3 people. By morning, it would be on 7 devices. By afternoon, it would be everywhere. But right now, in this moment, all anyone could do was absorb what had just happened. Camilla's lips parted. For the first time that night, she had no line ready. 31 seconds, and silence heavier than any applause. Her face held the smile of someone realizing too late that they'd started a game whose rules they didn't understand. And Rhys? He hadn't moved an inch. Only the flicker of the timer confirmed he'd spoken at all. The silence that followed wasn't polite, it wasn't respectful, it was surgical. The audience, once humming with light laughter and shuffled notes, sat frozen. Eyes fixed not on the guard, but on the queen consort, whose practiced composure had started to crack. The moderator hesitated, card in hand, throat clearing softly. "Shall we move on to the final round?" Camilla's jaw tightened. She laughed, or tried to. The sound came out wrong, forced, almost breathless. "Of course," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her lap. "I suppose we've all learned something today." The moderator, sensing the moment sagging beneath them, turned slightly toward Rhys, a subtle, reflexive gesture, the kind you make towards someone who'd just rescued a situation. Everyone noticed. Camilla saw it too. "You seem awfully confident," she said, louder now, tone sharpened to pierce, "for someone under orders to say nothing." Rhys didn't flinch, didn't even turn his head. But he answered, "Confidence isn't speaking louder, ma'am. It's knowing when not to." It landed like a bell toll. The audience exhaled as one, not a gasp, not a cheer, but the silent weight of recognition, the kind of line that didn't need applause because truth doesn't perform. Camilla sat back, lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced toward her aides. Some avoided eye contact. One looked at the floor. Stillness pulsed between them for several beats before she lifted her chin, armor snapping back into place. "You forget to whom you're speaking." Rhys's eyes lifted just enough to meet hers again, not defiant, not insolent, just steady, measured. "No, ma'am," he said. "I remember precisely." And that was it. No quip, no punchline, just an answer that made the Queen Consort's authority feel as brittle as the silence she'd walked into. The moderator, now visibly sweating, turned toward the production booth and gave a tight motion with his hand across his throat. A signal. The broadcast feed cut to a logo. Technical pause. No music, no transition. Just a sudden and awkward disappearance. Camilla stood. The room did not. Traditionally, in royal settings, when a royal stands, the audience rises. It's reflex. It's centuries of muscle memory. But this time, it lagged. A few donors began to rise, unsure. Others remained seated. A reverend in the third row frowned openly. One aide moved to escort Camilla gently from the set. The applause never came, not because people forgot, but because something had shifted, and no one wanted to fake what wasn't deserved. She walked out of frame, not humiliated, but worse, diminished. And Rhys? He remained exactly where he had always been, unmoving, silent, seen. That quiet humiliation, the kind not shouted or spun or filtered, would do more damage than any tabloid headline. Because it wasn't scandal, it wasn't gossip, it was truth, played out in real time, before witnesses, without drama. A single guard, a single question, and the moment a crown cracked, not from pressure, but from being met by someone who simply didn't bow to noise. The corridors of Windsor were quiet that night, quieter than usual. Rain tapped along the lead glass windows in thin lines, the storm outside a whisper compared to the silence inside. No one spoke of the broadcast directly, they didn't need to. The clip had already made its way to internal palace comms before the official channel cut it. The full 31 seconds, unedited, untrimmed, and most importantly, unrecoverable. In a chamber near the north wing, Prince William stood alone before a playback monitor. The glow lit only the side of his face. Behind him, 3 senior aides waited with clasped hands and furrowed brows. He watched the moment in silence. Camilla's smile, the question, the pause, Rhys's voice, Camilla's face. Then he said without looking up, "Preserve the raw feed, mark it no broadcast clearance, lock it internally." No one questioned him. 10 minutes later, William requested Sergeant Rhys Mallory. The meeting was brief, just two men face to face in a room that had seen centuries of wars, treaties and mistakes. Rhys entered, standing at ease. "You followed protocol?" William asked plainly. "Yes, sir." She gave a direct order. I responded exactly once. "Did you speak out of turn?" "No, sir." She asked a question. I answered it. William nodded once, then said nothing for a moment. "Then that's all that will be said. You'll receive no commendation, no reprimand. Understood?" "Perfectly, sir." There was no smile, no handshake, just mutual understanding. And that was all Rhys needed. Elsewhere, behind heavy doors near the Queen's suite, another conversation was unravelling. King Charles had watched the segment too, alone, twice. The first time he'd watched it the way a husband does, concerned, protective, already thinking about how to contain the damage. The second time he'd watched it the way a king does, analysing, weighing consequences, recognising patterns he'd seen before in his own mother's reign. Elizabeth had always said, "The crown's authority is like a glass sculpture, solid when handled properly, shattered when grasped too tightly." Camilla had grasped too tightly, and the whole country had watched it crack. Charles had spent decades navigating the impossible balance between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. He'd defended Camilla through scandals, through public hatred, through years of being cast as the villain in a story the press wouldn't let die. He'd stood by her because he believed in her, believed she could grow into the role, could earn the respect that hadn't been freely given. But respect couldn't be demanded, and it certainly couldn't be performed at a subordinate's expense. When he entered her sitting room, Camilla was mid-sentence with a press aide, voice clipped, explaining how the clip needed tonal reframing. The aide looked pale, nodding mechanically while holding a tablet showing early social media reactions. None of them were good. Charles dismissed her with a glance. Camilla didn't rise. She stared ahead at the flickering fireplace, jaw set, shoulders tight. "He made me look like a fool," she said quietly. Charles didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the darkened grounds. "Do you know why my mother never engaged the guards in conversation during ceremonies?" he asked. Camilla didn't respond. "Because she understood they weren't ornaments. They were soldiers, and soldiers, when pushed, don't perform, they execute." He turned to face her. "You didn't make a guard answer a question tonight. You issued a command to a decorated serviceman on live television and expected him to fumble for your entertainment." "It was a charity quiz. It was a miscalculation," Charles said, his voice quiet but final. "And now every guard in service knows that if they're humiliated in uniform, their sergeant didn't break. He won." The weight of that statement settled between them. Camilla turned to him then, not defensive, but weary. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she simply asked, "And what do you intend to do?" You see how they're talking about it. 31 seconds of silence. That man's smug little face, plastered across the tabloids by morning. "It wasn't smug," Charles said. "It was still." "He embarrassed the crown." "No," Charles said again, this time slower. "He reminded it what discipline looks like." Camilla turned to him then, not defensive, but weary. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she simply asked, "And what do you intend to do?" He folded his hands behind his back. "Nothing. The matter is closed." She blinked. "He undermined me." "No," Charles said softly. "You did." He left before she could reply. That night, down the eastern corridor, Rhys resumed post. Same uniform, same stillness. The same unreadable gaze beneath the bearskin cap. But something had changed. As aides walked past him, they didn't glance away like they used to. They nodded, subtle, respectful. But it was what happened in the guard's mess after midnight that would define what the moment actually meant. 6 off-duty guardsmen sat in a room that had held similar conversations for 3 centuries. Stone walls, low lighting, the smell of boot polish and old wood. They'd all watched the broadcast. Some had been there in person. Others had seen the clip that was already circulating through encrypted channels. Corporal Davies, the younger guard who'd recorded the room on his phone, sat with his arms crossed, still processing. He didn't break protocol, Davies said. She gave a direct order. He had to respond. Aye, said another, a Welsh guardsman named Price. But he didn't just respond. He embarrassed her. No, the voice came from the corner. Sergeant Major Webb, a man who'd served for 38 years and had seen more than most. He answered honestly, there's a difference. The room went quiet. Webb stood, walking to the centre. What Mallory did tonight wasn't rebellion. It was something more dangerous to people who misuse authority. He showed competence where they expected decoration, intelligence where they assumed silence. And when given the choice between protecting his dignity and protecting theirs, he chose the institution. How's that choosing the institution? Davies asked. Because he proved what we are, Webb said. Not props, not statues, soldiers. And when a royal forgets that, they need reminding. He looked around the room. Every one of you will be tested like this someday. Maybe not on camera. Maybe not with a riddle. But someone with authority will push you to see if you'll bend. And when that moment comes, you'll remember tonight. You'll remember that Sergeant Mallory stood his ground without raising his voice, breaking protocol, or dishonouring the crown. He paused. That's what discipline looks like, not silence and choice. The room absorbed that in the kind of silence that only comes when truth has been spoken plainly. Webb nodded once, then left. The others sat for a while longer, saying nothing. But they all knew. Something had shifted tonight. Not just for Rhys, for all of them. He didn't acknowledge them. He didn't need to. He wasn't a man with status. He was a man who had stood still while power overreached and hadn't flinched. And somewhere in the West Wing, the woman who wore that power found herself, for the first time in years, alone in a room full of mirrors, each one reflecting something she didn't expect to see, her own undoing. By morning, the footage had been officially trimmed for broadcast. The Royal Communications Office released a polished version of the charity event, 15 minutes shorter, with one full segment quietly omitted. No mention of the guard, no logic questions, no queen consort in the final round. But inside the palace, no one was fooled, not the staff, not the security detail, and certainly not the family. The full clip circulated behind doors, passed between departments, whispered about in corridors, watched in quiet rooms with the sound turned low. They all had their own names for it. The archivists called it the paradox broadcast. Logistics called it the red pause. But to most inside Windsor, it would come to be known by 3 words: the 31-second command. Camilla emerged late that morning for a scheduled photo opportunity in the marble hall. Her face was as composed as ever, hair curled, pearls aligned, but her smile was drawn, and her voice, when she addressed the small press pool, was a beat too careful. Last night's quiz was all in good spirit, she said with a vague chuckle. We're so pleased it sparked such thoughtfulness. Reporters nodded. Some jotted notes. But they all saw it. Her hands were trembling slightly as she held the microphone, not shaking from fear, but from something worse in public life, a loss of control. One reporter later wrote in his private journal, "She looked like someone trying to hold the curtain closed after the audience had already seen behind it." Across the castle, in the regimental quarters, Sergeant Rhys Mallory found an envelope tucked neatly inside his locker. No insignia, no wax seal, just thick cream paper folded crisply. Inside, a single handwritten note. For 31 seconds, you carried the crown better than anyone else in the room. No signature, but the ink was royal and the script unmistakable. Rhys said nothing. He folded the note once, exactly in half, and slid it behind his regimental ID inside the inner lining of his breastplate case. Then he buttoned his tunic, adjusted his gloves, and made his way to post. As the sun broke through the thin cloud cover, the gates of Windsor caught the light. Outside, tourists gathered behind cordons, phones raised, murmurs spread, not about the royal family this time, but about a soldier. "He's the one, isn't he?" a woman whispered. "The one from the clip." Rhys stood exactly as he always had, chin levelled, shoulders squared, motionless. But this time, his silence didn't make him invisible. It made him unforgettable. The camera pulls back, wide shot, over the palace lawn. The guard stands still. The Queen Consort doesn't reappear that day, and somewhere beneath centuries of velvet and glass, the message endures. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. Sometimes in war, sometimes in peace, and sometimes in 31 seconds of silence. Do you think the guard went too far, or did he simply do what no one else dared? And should Camilla have been reprimanded for turning duty into a spectacle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you believe silence can be sharper than power, hit that like button, subscribe with the bell icon turned on, and share this video with someone who still believes discipline is just about standing still. Our next Royal Guard story is already waiting on your screen. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another moment where duty didn't just protect the crown, it reminded it how to carry itself.